Okay, let's get right into it. There's this massive uproar happening across India right now, and it's all about the new E20 petrol. This was supposed to be a total game changer. But instead, what we're hearing from drivers are stories of performance problems, cars breaking down, and just a whole lot of confusion. So what's really going on here?
And that really brings us to the core question we're tackling in this explainer. How can a policy that was designed to save the country billions of dollars end up costing regular drivers more money? It just doesn't add up, right? It feels like a huge contradiction because, well, it is.
Now, if you've been on social media, you've probably seen people calling this whole thing a scam. But here's the thing, it's really not. The policy itself, the idea behind it, is actually pretty solid. The real problem, and this is what we're going to unpack, is that this is a classic story of good intentions meeting some seriously bad execution.
All right, so to really get why this went off the rails, we first have to look at what the government was trying to achieve in the first place. Let's talk about the noble promise, the why behind this whole E20 policy.
Okay, so what even is E20 petrol? It's actually super simple. It's just regular petrol that's been blended with 20% ethanol. And ethanol is just a type of biofuel, basically a combustible alcohol that's often made from agricultural stuff like sugarcane or corn. This isn't some crazy new idea, by the way. Countries all over the world do this.
And you have to admit, the government's vision here was pretty compelling. I mean, picture this. You get to slash the country's massive bill for imported oil. At the same time, you're boosting income for farmers by creating this whole new market for their crops. And on top of all that, you're lowering carbon emissions and making the country more self-reliant for its energy. I mean, on paper, it sounds like a perfect win-win-win situation.
And if you want to grasp just how massive this ambition was, just look at this number. We're talking about a potential savings of $28 billion. That's the amount of foreign money India could theoretically save on oil imports. That's money that would stay right here, inside the country, boosting the economy instead of flowing out to other nations.
Okay, so if the idea was so great and the potential savings were so huge, where did it all go so wrong? Well, that brings us to the real heart of the issue. We've identified 4 major gaps, 4 big problems with how this policy was actually executed.
All right, problem number 1. Let's call it the compatibility gap. And this one really starts with some basic science. The key phrase to know here is calorific value. It sounds complicated, but it just means how much energy is packed into the fuel. And when you compare petrol and ethanol, well, it's not even close. Petrol just packs a way bigger punch. We're talking about ethanol having about 34% less energy density. That's a huge difference.
So, what does that mean in the real world? It's simple. With less energy in every liter, your car's engine has to burn more fuel just to go the same distance. And this isn't just a theory, The government's own report from NITI Aayog predicted this would happen. For a typical car, you're looking at a 6 to 7% drop in mileage. And for a two-wheeler, it's about 3 to 4%. That really adds up over time.
And what made this whole mileage problem even worse was the timeline. See, the original plan was to roll this out by 2030, but then it got fast-tracked to 2025. That sudden change gave car manufacturers practically no time to properly re-engineer their engines, so even the brand-new cars that are labeled E20 ready aren't truly optimized for it. And what about all the older cars on the road? Well, they need serious modifications. We're talking new parts that cost thousands of rupees just to run this new fuel safely. The entire system just wasn't ready.
So on top of the car compatibility issues, we have a second, even bigger problem. It's what experts call the food versus fuel dilemma. See, the whole policy was sold on the promise of using surplus grain, stuff we had extra of. But the reality? A whopping 42% of the ethanol being produced is coming from maize. Corn? A staple food crop that people eat.
And the consequence of diverting all that food to fuel is, well, it's genuinely shocking. Get ready for this number. Because so much maize was being turned into ethanol, India actually ran into a shortage for its own people. The result? A 7,940% increase in maize imports this year. I mean, think about that. India went from being a major exporter of maize to having to import it just to keep up.
Okay, so just as drivers are dealing with worse mileage and worrying about their food supply, a third bombshell drops: insurance. Companies started putting out notices like this one from ACO saying, hey, if your older car's engine fails because you used the wrong fuel, your insurance claim might not be approved. They called it gross negligence. So suddenly, you're not just paying more for fuel, you're also risking a huge repair bill with absolutely no insurance to back you up.
And finally, there's the fourth major execution gap:
This one's a bit of a hidden cost, something that's easy to overlook but is incredibly important, especially in a country like India. We're talking about the massive amount of water it takes to produce all this ethanol.
Honestly, the numbers here are just mind-boggling. To make just 1 single liter of ethanol, it takes over 3,600 liters of water if you're using sugarcane. And if you're using maize, it's over 4,600 liters. Just let that sink in for a moment. For a policy that's supposed to be environmentally friendly and sustainable, relying on crops that use that much water, well, it raises some pretty serious questions.
Okay, so we've laid out all the problems, and it's clear the execution was seriously flawed. But the story doesn't have to end here. The good news is that there are solutions. There's a clear path forward, especially if we look at examples from other countries that have gotten this right. Let's take Brazil, for example. They are the undisputed world champions of biofuels. But here's the crucial part. They didn't do it overnight. They started way back in the 1970s, and it took them 4 decades to gradually, slowly increase their ethanol blend up to E27. What was their secret? A slow, careful rollout and a focus on giving people options with flex fuel cars, which lets drivers choose what kind of fuel they want to use.
Another huge piece of the puzzle is technology, specifically something called 2G, or second-generation ethanol. Now, what's so great about it? Well, instead of using food crops, 2G ethanol is made from agricultural waste. We're talking about leftover straw, husks, and stalks. This completely solves that whole food versus fuel problem we talked about. Now, the tech isn't everywhere yet, but this is clearly where the future is heading.
So when you put all of this together, a much smarter path forward starts to look pretty clear. First, and most importantly, slow down. Go back to that original 2030 deadline. Just doing that gives the auto industry the breathing room it desperately needs. Then use that extra time to shift the focus away from food crops and invest heavily in developing that 2G ethanol technology. And finally, and maybe this is the most important part, give people a choice. Let consumers decide between E10 and E20 at the pump.
At the end of the day, what this whole situation really teaches us is that good intentions just aren't enough. The goals behind the E20 policy were absolutely the right ones, but a rushed, poorly planned rollout has really shaken public trust. So the big question we're left with is this. Can India learn from these very public mistakes and actually build the sustainable, affordable, and reliable fuel future it was hoping for in the first place?